Thank you for joining us this morning. We are delighted to bring to you a conversation today between young activists and, in my opinion, a civil rights legend in Charles Person. We would like to begin with thanking our sponsors for the event today. The Penny Foundation, Lord Watson and Dorian were fantastic in helping and supporting us put this event together. The Freedom Rider Training Institute, Jacksonville State University, and the use of their studios here, and the Realcast Studios in Anniston, Alabama, Gilbert Creative. So we certainly want to thank them for their support and their efforts in making this event possible today. Today we're joined by three leading activists on the front lines of protests that have been happening across America. The recent tragic and senseless death of George Floyd spurred protests that were nationwide and indeed worldwide. And so today we have with us Eva Melton, community organizer and founding pastor of the Firm Foundation Church; Caleb Neverson, president of the NAACP Youth Council and president of the Birmingham Police Youth Advisory Council; Cara McClure, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Birmingham and founder of Faith and Work. You will see the panelists on the second part of today's virtual event. When the planning for this event took place, we wanted to get someone who was certainly knowledgeable. As many of you know, I have a son, Lincoln, who I want to learn how to play basketball, and my good friend Pete and Brad, certainly I could ask them, but if I could go get LeBron James, I would go get LeBron James. And conversely, with this conversation, we didn't want to just grab someone um, who had no experience in protest to have this conversation. So in a sense, we went to go get the LeBron James of the civil rights movement, and I would call him Mr. Charles Person. Now, Mr. Person, you were a young person, not a man, a teenager when you began your career in civil rights. Can you talk to us about how it felt when you first began the sit-ins in Atlanta? What was going through your mind? What motivated you? And really, how did you get through that experience?
My adventure into activism started when I applied to Georgia Tech, and that they denied me admission. So I applied to Emory University. They also denied my admission. In fact, at Emory, I had sent in my application on a Monday, and I got my rejection back on a Wednesday, and we didn't have express mail in those days. That just shows you how determined they were. They didn't want me. So I was complaining like most teenagers, and my grandfather says, "Oh, you want to sit there and pout about it, or you want to do something about it?"
Wow.
Well, that admonition, once, I decided I'm going to go to Morehouse. It's a very good school. And, the timing couldn't have been better because I arrived on campus when the students had already started the sit-in movements, and we were trying to incorporate more and more students. And I became a willing volunteer.
Wow. I would imagine it's not easy for someone your age to be screamed and yelled at as you're trying to get something to eat. So, can you talk about your feelings and emotions that you were having during your first experience of being in the civil rights movement?
Well, I don't think, as an 18-year-old, you don't look at your mortality. I wasn't thinking about death or anything like that. So my fear factor was very, very low. But I was very excited because now I had an opportunity to make a difference in the world. And that gave me a lot of pleasure. And I met some wonderful people who were very, very enthusiastic. And I think that we supported each other with a lot of the things, the movement we did. We sang a lot of freedom songs. We prayed a lot, but our prayers were teenage prayers. We weren't like some Baptist preacher that, long drawn out. It was, Lord, look after me. Lord, protect me. Those kinds of things. And we would also recite the 23rd Psalm. It was nothing very elaborate, but we got the message because we know we couldn't do it alone. And, being brought up in the church, we did have those simplistic ideas that, the Lord would take care of us. And he did.
So, Mr. Person, can you talk about the experience of you in Washington, D.C., you're in the training with great men and women who would accompany you on the Freedom Ride. Can you talk about the training that you all took part in, and how that prepared you or did not prepare you for what you experienced on the Freedom Rides.
Most of us had extensive training in the South, well, because that's where all the activity, most of the activity was. But CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, wanted to ensure that we would not fight back or strike back inadvertently, which meant that if you're prepared for someone, you can deal with it. But if someone came up from behind you, you might just inadvertently strike back. So they wanted to make sure that under no circumstances that we would be violent. And the training was very extensive. And the thing is, though, our level of what we anticipated at the level of violence that we would expect was they might yank you off a stool, they might spit on you, they might even put a cigarette out on you. But that was, basically the extent of the violence that we had anticipated. We had no idea that it could have gotten any worse, but we did find out that it could get a lot worse.
Now, Mr. Person, you were a young man, and I would imagine being spat upon, cigarettes put out on you, you would want to fight back from that. But core and really a large part of the civil rights movement was dedicated to nonviolence. Can you speak about the importance of that aspect? And I believe one of the most strategic moves in the civil rights movement, being nonviolent, one of the most important things that you all used during that time. Can you talk about the importance of nonviolence and how you approached it as a young man? Even with the willingness to fight back, you did not. And can you just talk about your experience with nonviolence and how important it was to the civil rights movement?
Nonviolence, well, Dr. King had proved that nonviolence works, so did Gandhi. Uh, we needed to develop allies. And if we fought back, we would not get people sympathetic to our cause. Likewise, we knew that even the most violent guy would not get any pleasure out of beating someone who didn't fight back. It's frustrating because we were able to take their best shots and we didn't go down. And it's frustrating because they didn't have anything left. So it frustrated them, and a lot of times the beating subsided because they weren't getting any activity. You can't brag about beating somebody who doesn't fight back. So and, a lot of us chose this as a tactic, even though there were many who chose nonviolence as a way of life. And as I got more into it, I also adopted the fact, that that's a good way to live your life because, I was brought up and I had been taught to shoot and shoot well. And I'm an expert with the rifle, even now, and a sharpshooter with the pistol. But I choose not to employ those tactics, or those things that I learned. Also, I'm an advanced student in Kung Fu. So, I've had a very interesting upbringing, but those things also tempered my, my disposition and my personality.
And Mr. Person, if you would, I would like to, when we talk about the importance of allies and the Freedom Riders being one of the first interracial groups to tackle segregation and Jim Crow in the South, if I could, just let me read a few of the members who were left Washington D.C. with you um, in May of 1961. James Farmer, Jim Peck, Genevieve Hughes, Joe Perkins, John Lewis, Walter Bergman, Francis Bergman, Albert Bigelow, Jimmy McDonald, Ed Blankenheim, John Moody, who was replaced by Hank Thomas, and yourself, Charles Person, the youngest of the Freedom Riders. Those names don't get mentioned often, but they were critical and a very vital and important part of the civil rights movement as a whole, and are known as the original Freedom Riders. And I just wanted to mention their names so people can understand that this was not about known activists. These were people who came together who were not known. Even John Lewis wasn't known at that time. But I think it's important that we remember, and every chance we get, we highlight everyone in the group. And so I'm glad I got a chance to read those names off, so people can understand and know who they are.
Uh,
So, do you remember the last? Because I know one of the important parts of the Freedom Rides were the meetings and the planning sessions that took place in the evenings after every ride. Do you remember the last time you all got together before you boarded the bus in DC?
Well, the last meeting was it was I guess like the Last Supper. Uh, we were optimistic. We were glad the training was over and we're ready to hit the road. And we shared a lot of intimate stories, because we didn't have a lot of time for personal time during the initial parts of the training. Um, but we always planned how we were going to conduct ourselves throughout the ride. We would always have dinner together. We would have an after action. We would discuss those things that went well and those things that didn't go so well each day so that we could make improvement. And also, there was a time for them to give us our allowance. Now, this is important because one of the things that we were afraid of, if you were at a lunch counter and you ordered food, and for the miraculously they serve you, and you didn't have money to pay for it, so that would have been very embarrassing. So they made sure we had ample funds that we could pay for any meals or drinks that we were served. Um, and also, we didn't want to get arrested because many of the southern towns had a vagrancy laws. And I think it was about if you had less than $10 in your pocket, you could be arrested as a vagrant. And in a lot of southern towns, those same persons were hired out to local governments or local business and stuff like that. So that was one way of getting people. Uh, uh, they would incarcerate people for I would say nefarious purposes. So we wanted to make sure that we were not put in the category of vagrants.
Wow. And so, Mr. Person, we fast forward to Mother's Day, May 14th, 1961. You were fortunate, I think, and it was maybe Providence, but you were certainly blessed to be from Atlanta and to be able to stay at home the night that you all got to Atlanta that Saturday. And you wake up Sunday morning, um, get on the bus. There were some occurrences before you got to Atlanta and South Carolina and things like that, but that Sunday morning, May 14th, can you talk about what you were thinking as you boarded the bus? Because you talked about before the meeting that you all had with Dr. King that Saturday night at a university in Atlanta. Can you talk about that meeting with Dr. King?
Well, Saturday when we got into Atlanta, we went to a nice black restaurant called Pascal's, which is still in existence today. We had dinner and with Dr. King and some of his staff, and there we went to Clark College. Clark College at the time, and we had a meeting. And we had hoped that we could encourage Dr. King to accompany us, but he not only did not want to accompany us, but also he warned us. He said that terrible things await you in Alabama, and he was trying to dissuade us from going. Now, we had a tremendous amount of respect for Dr. King, and I had worked with him before in the Atlanta movement, but we had a job to do, and taking that into consideration. But we still wanted to continue to march. So Sunday morning, after Dad dropped me off at the bus station, the thought lingered of what is awaiting for us in Alabama. And you just, well, we're going to be all right. We're going to be all right. And that's the attitude I think I and not only, most of us had that feeling that, hey, everything's going to be all right.
Wow. And I have to tell you, Mr. Person, I think it's awesome that I'm sitting here talking to someone who had a meeting with Dr. King. That's a really, really awesome part of this. So you get on the bus in Atlanta, cross the Alabama state line. Um, can you, that was your first time in Alabama, I'm assuming. What can you take us through? You cross the Alabama state line and just take us right up into you arrive in Anniston.
The ride was extremely well. It was a beautiful day. It was Mother's Day, and we had no incidents until we got to the Georgia-Alabama line when a man was getting off the bus, and he looks at me because my seat was right at the door, and he says, "You niggas have had it good here in Georgia." He said, "But you're in Alabama now." Well, hey, I'm looking at this guy. He's getting off the bus. So, my teenage mind saying, well, hey, we don't have to worry about this guy. But little did I know that a couple hours later, I would see him in Birmingham. And the unique thing about it, the way he was dressed, He had on a black and red plaid shirt, long sleeve flannel in May. It made him stand out. Really, I mean, you couldn't miss him. Plus, he was a heavy-set guy with bib overalls. So, when I saw him again, I knew that this is the same guy who got off the bus, and he more or less just got with some friends, and they drove him on into Birmingham. Um, when we got into Anniston, the bus station was closed, and there were people milling out around in the front. And our bus driver, gets off, and he goes and talks to those people.
And can you talk about what happened? I know there was an assault that happened on the bus. Can you take us through that?
When the bus driver gets back on the bus, he says, "I understand that the Greyhound bus has been set afire, and they're taking the occupants to the hospital by the carloads." Now, we knew that our friends were on that bus, but we didn't have the advantage of cell phones and all those kinds of things. So, the extent of their injuries, we had no idea. But your mind plays tricks with you. When I think of fire, I think how devastating and how horrible it would be to be caught in a burning bus or a burning house. Um, so the bus driver, he gets back off the bus. He talks to these people. He gets back on and he says, "We're not going to move this bus until the blacks get to the back of the bus." Well, at least the niggers get to the back of the bus. Of course, the students, we didn't move. At that point, 8 men get on the bus and they started beating us. They started with me, and my seatmate was Herman Harris. And they were beating us and forcing us towards the center of the aisle. Once we got there, they were forcing us towards the back of the bus. When we got midway of the bus, James Peck and Dr. Walter Bergman, white freedom riders, came to our aid. That really made them angry to think that whites would come to the aid of these black students. Dr. Bergman was the oldest freedom rider. He was 61. They knocked him to the floor of the bus, and they began to stomp him in his chest. And had his wife not implored, they probably could have killed him there. Now, James Peck was a bleeder. He bled very easily. And when he fell to the floor of the bus, his blood covered the floor. And here you have us being forced over Dr. Bergman, who was slipping on James's blood. And it was just a mess. Then they got all the other students involved. Eventually, they got us near the back of the bus, and they physically threw us to the back of the bus. And one eyewitness says they stacked us like pancakes. And once we were in the back of the bus, they sat midway the bus, and they sat there, and they taunted us all the way into Birmingham. Now, the bus driver had been warned that a mob awaited our bus. Now, had he not taken an alternate route into Birmingham, and if they had set our bus on fire, I don't know if we had the strength or the ability to get off the bus. But anyway, we rode into Birmingham. It took us 2 hours from Anniston, and if you've done that route, you know that it's not a 2-hour drive. But eventually we pulled into the terminal there in Birmingham.
And I think we know. So basically, Mr. Person, you were assaulted in Anniston. You get to Birmingham. You see the mob, and I think this is where um, we see what it truly takes to be who you were during that time. Assaulted, beaten, bloodied in Anniston. You get to Birmingham and you still carry on with your mission. You still get off the bus to go and desegregate and walk into the whites only lobby in Birmingham. Bloodied, beaten, and you still get off the bus. Mr. Person, I am like to think that I'm a tough individual, but what was going through your mind during that time when you had just experienced that in Anniston and you get to Birmingham and you walk into the terminal and you see it lined with young white men? What were you thinking?
Well, it takes you back to a song we used to sing an awful lot. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around.
Wow.
Um, James was badly
Wow.
beaten, and but we were the designated testers, and I know he was in bad shape, but I says let's go, and we did.
Wow.
Um, it was we didn't realize how bad it was until we got into the waiting room and the entire wall of men came towards us. We were severely outnumbered. People said they had all sorts of weapons and even guns, but James went down almost immediately. And I guess I, being younger, I was able to maintain my balance. And a photographer took a picture, and when the picture was snapped, the flash startled them, and they let me go. I
Wow.
just walked away from that crowd, and I was able to walk out to the street where a city bus came, and I got on it. But one of the things, this is something I never told anyone, and I don't know if I can get through this all the way. But Dr. Bergman and Francis Bergman, they were the oldest. They had promised to take care of me. And on the bus, Dr. Bergman came to help us. And of course, like I say, he was beaten and stomped on. But what happened in Birmingham, uh, Dr. Bergman came to see how, once he found out that James and I were in trouble, he came to help us. And here you have, he got knocked down. And here you have the 61-year-old man crawling on his hands and knees to try to give us help.
Wow.
I never told that story, but I mean, can you picture that?
And
Because he didn't have to do it.
and I think, you know, that's a part of the story, Mr. Person. Um, the white and black freedom riders who put their lives on the line is just a phenomenal part of the story. Um, and for the camaraderie and the brotherhood that was shown during that time is really an example of how we can move forward together. And you all showed that during that time, and we are eternally grateful for the sacrifice that you all made um, 59 years ago. And I think, Mr. Person, part of your story and why you're such a remarkable individual, um, you fought America for your rights to be treated equally. Um, and then, if that wasn't tough enough, Mr. Person, you joined the United States Marine Corps even after that. So you fought America, and then you went and fought for America. And I think that part of your story is just a phenomenal part. And so, can you talk about what it took? Because the freedom rides were certainly a huge part of your life, but it wasn't all of your life. Can you talk about the decision um, that you made, having gone through all of that, um, being a freedom rider, and then making the move for leaving that and then going and joining the Marine Corps?
Well, after the freedom rides, that picture was used by the FBI and the Justice Department to indict those men. They were all identified,
Hmm.
and they brought them to trial very rapidly.
Hmm.
And I know you recall where the mob was outside of the First Baptist Church
Hmm.
in Montgomery,
Hmm.
and I was across town for the trial. Well, we went through the shenanigans of conducting a trial,
Hmm.
but you go into a courtroom or you go into a place and you realize that hey, there's not going to be any justice here today. but eventually they were all exonerated. So when I returned home to Atlanta, my mother was afraid because she knew I was going to continue in the movement, and she felt that it would be safer for me to be in the Army than to continue in the civil rights movement.
Wow.
So, I hadn't been totally honest with my parents when I first joined the Rods. So I figured I owed them that. So I went, instead of joining the Army, I joined the Marine Corps because at the time the Marine Corps, I had fewer senior enlisted and very few commissioned officers. So I knew that I had the qualifications to be commissioned. And that was why I chose to join the Marine Corps. That was before anyone knew about uh, Vietnam and some of the other little conflicts that we had during that particular time.
Hmm. Well,
My mother felt,
I would be remiss if I didn't repeat what you said, Mr. Person. Your mother told you that she felt it would be safer for you to join the Army, join the military, as opposed to staying in Atlanta and being a student because she felt um, those men, and I use that term loosely, would kill you. So she felt it was safer for you to be in the military. And I think that really describes, um, in a nutshell, what America was like in 1961 for a black man. That's a really powerful part of the story. And so, Mr. Person, you did 20 years in the Marine Corps, and I know we don't have time to get into much of that, but can you talk about the racial climate that you experienced while you were in the Marine Corps and how that relates to your time as being a freedom rider?
well, I got in the Marine Corps after they had integrated a course, and there were a great bunch of Marines called the Monthly Point Marines. But still, there were some issues, a lot of issues. For example, my drill instructor admired my ability to shoot and to run and do all those kinds of things. But when he found out I had a highest IQ in the platoon, he tried to do all sorts of things to force me out. But had he known my background, he knew that I was not a quitter, and there's just no way anything he could have done that was legal that could have gotten me to quit or to leave the Marine Corps. But I made friends rather easily, and I had a lot of colleagues, and this really benefited throughout because they learned to respect me for my as a person. Well, no pun intended. But I made friends easily, and all those things helped out when we got to Vietnam because then you became a life and death type situation. But I didn't have any problems. And there were young kids who in Vietnam who displayed their Confederate flags and things like that. But I never had any problems when I went on the patrols or when I were out in the foxholes because I think one of the words that was around, that nigga's crazy, but he'll keep you alive. So I
Wow.
didn't have any problems, when I was in combat.
Wow. And before we go to the panelists, Mr. Person, I would ask, can you compare the two? Can you compare your time as a freedom rider and what you went through on during the freedom rides to combat in Vietnam? Because it seems like you were at war in both places. Can you talk about the differences and, the impact of, going and becoming a freedom rider and experiencing that and then going to war in Vietnam?
Oh, I like to characterize it like this. In the Freedom Rides, I met some wonderful people who will always be in my mind. And likewise, in the military, in Marine Corps, I found people the same way. It's just like like Dr. Bergman and his devotion. I found the same type of relationships in the Marine Corps that people would give their all to protect you. And no matter where in life, I've learned that there are a lot of good people in this world, and there's a lot of there are people who have evil intent, But you have to look at the positive part. That there are a lot of good people, and they support us and they encourage us. And that's the parallel I would hold, is that there are a lot of good people no matter where you go in life, and you just have to be thankful that God has put those kind of people in your life. One of the things I would like to add, though, just like Dr. Bergman and James Peck, they took a beating all day on the 14th, and then other times as well. But John Lewis did this time and time again. You cannot imagine, if you can imagine just what we experienced on that one day, John did this over and over and over again. I mean, you can't, I mean, how selfless can you be that you would put your body on the line time after time and again? And, you know, I just relived the story with Dr. Bergman this week. And so that's why it's very fresh in my mind, but I never had an opportunity to share it with anyone. But it made me think how much John gave. I was there, you know, when, you know, at other times, but John he gave just so much. And now I can't imagine anyone, even Dr. King never experienced the level of violence repeatedly like John did.
Yeah, and I think that is so timely, Mr. Person, with the passing a few weeks ago of Congressman John Lewis, Freedom Rider John Lewis, and the outpouring of love and admiration and respect and honor that I think a boy from a small town in Alabama brought the country to a standstill, and rightfully so. Mr. Person, right now, we would certainly like to turn to the panelists and let them have an opportunity for you to engage with them. And so we would begin with Eva. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome, Eva. Well, if you wanted to ask a question, Mr. Person, go right ahead.
Awesome. Awesome. So you guys, I want to say thank you for this rich discussion and dialogue that has taken place before us. And just want to say, Mr. Person, we're grateful for your sacrifice and just thank you for even joining us in this cross-generational discussion. But my question for today, I want to glean from all of the panelists, including Mr. Person, and we'll start with Mr. Person. So during the Freedom Rides, you guys were challenging legislation that existed already, but was not being enforced below the Mason-Dixie line, right? And so today, in our times, especially around police brutality, it is legislation that kind of keeps us from moving forward, like qualified immunity. From my vantage point, some of those laws that protect police need to change. And so we have a lot that's happening. We're seeing Black Lives Matter murals pop up. We're seeing a lot of people chant Black Lives Matter. We're having protests, but what are some of the types of the training and techniques that our organizers and our activists today need to help us shift from kind of reactionary and art and chants to like policy changes?
Very good question. Uh, way we got started in Atlanta was thanks to a wonderful young lady named Rosalind Pope. We wrote the Appeal for Human Rights. In this document, we outline our grievances, every aspect of Black life at the time. And so community knew what we wanted. They knew why we were doing what we were doing, while we were marching, while we were boycotting, the whole 9 yards. So first, I think what needs to happen, especially under the climate that we're in now, is you have to identify yourselves as leaders of this new movement. You must define who you are, and you must define your goals, and you provide the city or the state with a list of your demands. That would be the first thing I would do, because right now we hear the term defund the police and all kinds of terms, and you've never defined them, but the media decided they're going to define it for you. So they have us doing everything from eliminating police to all kinds of wild ideas to politicize what you want. So you have to go out and you have to define your cause and let them know what you really mean by defund the police and in other terms as well. Um, I think that you need to hold news conferences. You need to get friends with some of the media people Because a lot of times, if you let them know in advance, they'll give you good coverage, and also they'll get your message out, not the message of someone else.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cara. What do you see that we need to start doing to kind of shift from saying Black Lives Matters and morals to actually addressing some of the policies like qualified immunity that would actually change and help us to be able to prosecute some of these police officers?
Well, thank you so much, Eva, for the question. Thank you so much to Mr. Person for being here. And on behalf of all of my Facebook friends who are watching and Black Lives Matter Birmingham chapter, we just want to say thank you so much. We're moved by your story and just ready to go out and do more work. So thank you. Eva, I just forgot the question, but I think some of the things that we can do is continue to glean from our elders and learn from the past. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can do learn from some of the same strategies, because what I'm hearing and what I was reading about the freedom riders, I'm like, it's so much of the same strategies. You know, I think that we move away from them sometimes, but I just hearing that being nonviolent was not just something they did, but it was actually part of their strategy. And so I had some questions, if you don't mind. I had a question for Mr. Pearson. When you see what's taking place across the country now with Hoover Police Department, not the way that they're treating the nonviolent protesters, with voter suppression and poverty all across the country, do you think we made a lot of progress, or have we gone backwards?
Well, I'm pleased with what the young people are doing today. We are making progress. I think what we need now more than anything is we understand the problem. We also have possible solutions. It's time for you and all the other groups is to move those demonstrations from the street into the boardrooms and the executive suites of the mayor's and governor's office. And what I would do is I would take those lists of demands that you have written up and you offer that to them and look for some sorts of negotiations. If they won't negotiate with you, if they won't listen to you, then you boycott them. And those same bodies that you've been walking the streets with and protesting with, now you got people who can walk picket lines. And now you can let them know you won them. They didn't listen. Now here comes where we hit you in your pocketbook. And I'll guarantee you, when you start getting in people's pocketbooks, they will listen. They might not agree with you, but they will listen.
You talked about defining leaders and defining who we are. In the day of Black Lives Matter, where we believe in having a leaderful movement, like not really defining because of safety. And would you tell us why that's important for us to define who the leader is? When we talked the other day, you stressed that you knew who the leader was and you knew your role. So we think about why it's important to define who their leader is.
Well, it's you. Okay. I know there is a fear factor, and there's concern, but there are other things in your organization that you can do to protect yourself. But you have to put a face on Black Lives Matter. See, all we know is signs and T-shirts. But you get out there and you explain to people, eyeball to eyeball. You got to have the chutzpah or whatever it takes to be out there out front. That's what leading is. I mean, it's dangerous. And I know at times, your knees will knock and you're starting to get sweaty palms and all those kinds of things. But somebody's got to be out there. You have to make the sacrifice. You got to put a face on your movement. Black Lives Matter has faces, and we want to see your happy faces, and you want them to see your face. Why? Because whenever they wake up, I want them to see your face right there in front of them, and they realize I'm gonna have to deal with this young lady. You know, and see, right now they're you know they're very elusive because they don't want to deal with the issue. So that's how they are able to avoid a lot of things. Well, the thing is, like, you want them to hear your voice, and when you call on the phone, oh, they say, oh, here she go again. You know, that's good. You want to be a thorn in their side. I mean, there's nothing else to let them know that I'm gonna be persistent. I'm gonna be nice. I'm gonna be nonviolent, but I'm gonna be here every day. That's something you have to do. And I realize and as far as leadership, you know, you can lead a march today. Cal can lead one tomorrow. You can lead one the next day. But rotate if that's what you want to do. But also, there's some other things that I had listed that you may not have considered. Do you have medics in your group? Do you have a photographer? Do you have someone to provide water and snacks for your group? I don't know if you're praying people, but do you have someone who can lead prayers and sing songs? I mean, what you should be organized from top to bottom. Everyone has a role, and the thing is, you participate. Like I said, if you're too afraid to march or sit in, then hey, maybe you should make signs or make sandwiches or bake cookies or something that you can do that you feel comfortable. Because it's a grassroots organization, so we want to use everybody, but we want to use them in a capacity that they can be helpful. You know, you don't want somebody who's scared out there because they can cause trouble. Likewise, don't let anyone hijack your march or your movement because they have a different agenda from what you have. That's why you define what you want to do. No, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And you stick to it. That's your plan. But you know, right now the media is not on our side. They have taken what you've tried to do and make it all something else. You gotta go back and seize the movement, and let them know, hey, this is us. This is what we're gonna do.
Yeah, wow.
Awesome. So Caleb, I see you over there. Go ahead and jump in with your question.
Yes. Well, first, I'd like to thank you so much for this opportunity. Oftentimes, people in my generation, we hear about the history, but having the opportunity to actually speak with a living legend and someone who actually lived through that moment is something that I'm very grateful for and I'll cherish for the rest of my life. My question is, how were the intersex among young people different from what you're witnessing now?
Wow. You know, I got my start with the youth group in the NAACP as well. That was my first entry into any type of awareness of what our people are confronted. Today, I think we are a more casual society. You don't have a dress code. We would never go on a march. I mean, the guys always had on a shirt and tie, and the girls wore their Sunday best. They didn't wear pants in those days, but I can understand that. But which created a lot of problems for us because if the young ladies were knocked down, we as men or young boys would try to protect them and conceal, them from being exposed unnecessarily. Because there were a lot of insidious people out there would do certain things that you wouldn't believe to embarrass our young ladies by picking them up in their dresses and with those crinolines and all those kind of things were exposed. So you don't have that much of a problem because women do wear pants now. But I think one of the biggest things was we had a dress code. Also, we had, there was a connection there because at the time, most of us were college students or high school students, and Dr. King finally even brought in grade school kids. But there was a commonality of the composition of our groups. And I know that nowadays, in order to get numbers, you have a lot of folks in there that you may not really know their background or what they want. You never had an opportunity to sit down and discuss with them what this movement is all about. They're just mad and they want to get involved. But the thing is that you have to let them know that this is a disciplined movement because this is our community. We just want to make our community better. See, it's not that we want to try to destroy our community. Because when you burn stuff down, break windows and stuff, that eyesore is in your community. That's not what we're after. You see, they have to understand that this is our community. We just want to elevate it to another level. And I think once we get that accord, that this is the betterment of the place where we live. These are our neighbors, and we want to protect them. And I think, well, you know, really, it's like what we're doing now. We need to have these conversations locally. No topic should be off limit. I mean, it should be a free for all. And once you have that kind of discussion, those kinds of discussions, I think you will find you'll have a more dedicated group, a more committed group, but also you will be, as they say, you will be on one accord.
Great, great. So you mentioned something, Mr. Person, that I love. You talked about how the media has distorted our message and the current movement, and which makes discussions like this and other independent media outlets so important at a time like this, especially while we're quarantined or still social distancing. But Cara, I wanted to ask you, how has Black Lives Matter Birmingham been able to leverage? Birmingham has so many podcasts and independent media outlets. How have you guys been able to kind of leverage that to help your message get out in your own way instead of waiting on mass media to distort it?
That's a good question, Eva. One of the things that we've had to do was befriend a lot of media, some of the Black media. And without giving out some of the strategies, I'm trying to see how to say this. I remember one protest telling some Black journalists to join us for some making signs or something like that. Not telling her that we were getting ready to do a protest, and but we just had a conversation with her why it was important and how harmful media has been to our movement, and that we needed help. We needed a friend, and so we found journalists who didn't work for, like, let's say the big media companies, and we just built coalition like that. Like even now we have we've created our own blogs. We've created our own let's say, I can't say some things, but we've created a lot of things on our own to get our message across, because that's really important. But again, is learning from our elders and what they did in the past has been golden for us. And that's why I'm so excited to be with Mr. Person today. He had me in tears earlier telling us his story, and stories are important. And Mr. Person, I wanted to ask you again, you talked about God and praying and music in y'all movement. How important is it to keep God at the forefront of this work?
Oh, wow.
Well, I've been Black all my life, and we are praying people. I mean, you know, really, it's you know yourself when you're taking that final or whatever. Sometimes we pray over that test, and Lord, let's see us through. So it's critical as a Black person. That's, you know, wherever your spirituality leads you, you have to be there. And I'll say it's nothing wrong with, you know, you could alternate saying a prayer in your group. And if you have I know there's a lot of good singers in our group too. So hey, utilize those voices. I mean, you know, there are patriotic songs, there's religious songs, and there's freedom songs. Whatever floats your boat, do it, because this brings you together. Also, what it does for me is it relaxes you enough that when you're gonna go into battle, and that's what's happening when you go and marching down these streets, you don't know what's happening. But you have one advantage we didn't have. When we were marching and picketing and so forth, the police and first responders were not on our side, and often they were in cahoots with the bad guys. So you don't have that as a problem. In fact, you could solicit the aid of the police in conducting a peaceful march. Why? Because they want to save community too, you see. And it's even more threatening for them nowadays because, like I say, some of the people that have hijacked these movements have been intent on violence and stuff, and they burned stuff down and broken a lot of windows.
So as we come back to Mr. Person, we're going to come back to you. But Caleb, you're obviously younger than the rest of us, and I love it. I've seen you so much. But what I want to know is, how did you find your role? Mr. Person talked about us understanding, helping people understand everybody's not meant to be on the front line of a protest. But what helped you find your role? How did you get involved with the NAACP and just be this powerful person that you are?
Wow. Well, I found my purpose and passion when I joined the NAACP. My grandmother, who was a civil rights foot soldier, Betty King, she introduced me to the NAACP, and it was there that I began to learn the history of the civil rights movement, and I was able to speak with local foot soldiers. I found my passion when I began to see injustice around the country and seeing that there weren't a lot of young people on the front lines and a lot of young people helping to push policy. I believe my purpose was found when I didn't see a lot of representation of young people.
Great. And Cara, just around the topic of roles, in Birmingham, we meet people. It's like with every uprising, you meet new people who don't know their role, right? How do we get better, all of us get better about helping people find their roles consistently and not just when, it's time to really get in the streets?
Yeah, but it all lots of times starts reactionary, and then you kind of learn one another and what each person is good at. And that's really important because that there is a lane for every single person. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to be suited and booted. You just have to have a desire and will to want to see change. And that's what I think I brought to the table. There was nothing special about Cara McClure. I just wanted to make a difference in the lives of many people. And then I surrounded myself around people who had all of the skills that I did not have, because I think you cannot be the smartest person in your group, right? So I found folks who was good at journalism, found folks who were good at photography. I found people who loved being canvassing in the community. I found folks who were good at law and policy. All of the things, I was good at bringing people together and building coalitions. I brought the passion to the team. I brought the strategy to the team. Okay, I got all the pieces together. Now let's meet and bring everything together. And so there is a lane for everybody. I don't want people to be at home thinking just because they don't want to be on the front lines in the street that they can't participate. Like Mr. Charles Person said, there were people who brought food. And that's one of the things I love about the activists that's on the front lines. Right now, they are very young, but they have listened, they watched, and they are doing the necessary things. There's somebody bringing posters and making posters. There's people that are bringing the food and the ice and the water. There's folks that are prepared when folks go to jail. So there's folks doing bail funds and freeing folks. And another thing that I love, Mr. Person, is that when they are arrested, which they've been getting arrested every single week, that there are a crew of people in the jail singing songs and cheering once they get out. I'm talking about the jail looks like a party. There's pizza and chicken. And so they made it like, okay, you all are the folks who are willing to put your bodies on the line. So we want to let you know that we appreciate that. And so I'm really proud of the young folks, and I'm really thankful that y'all see me as one of the young people. Makes me feel really good.
So I did have another question, and this kind of comes from listening to you, Mr. Person, tell your story. I've listened to your story, and today you added more to that story that we've never heard. So I appreciate you for just being vulnerable with us in that way. So often you see the violence that does happen, or what happens to us emotionally when we go out on the front lines, all the emotional aspect and wanting to continue to respond. But how important has self-care and healing and recognizing your triggers been for you, as from that time, that day, up until now?
I think, I look at what happens, and I look at the people involved as much as I can, and the ones who do happen to go get in front of the camera, uh, express their passion. And you have to have passion about the things that we do. And I think that if nothing else, we also show that there is diversity. We are not a monolithic person. We have our ideas and aspiration desires run the gamut. So that people beginning to see us as people, not as a person. We may share one goal, but the thing is, we each bring something different to the table, and this makes uh, that pie makes it so much more unique. And I just think that I'm so happy, like I say, to see your involvement. I want you to invite in other people, especially if you have a diverse community, if there are Jews or if there's Native Americans or whatever. Let everybody say this, you're all welcome to the table, because for so many years, we were not allowed to sit at the table. So, spread the feast, bring them on.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the movements here across Alabama right now, Mr. Persons, and we've done just that with coalition building, with a group called Stand as One. All across Alabama, there are groups popping up, and I credit this to what you all did, and also the work of Black Lives Matter over the past 6 years that I've been involved, and why that is so important is we didn't create this problem. And so we shouldn't solve it on our own. And so that's why I'm so glad to have so many allies. As a matter of fact, when you look at the protests across the state of Alabama and across the country, you are seeing more of our allies, seeing more white people, and just more of everybody participating. That's really good. And there are other ways that people have participated besides being on the front lines and protesting. We have groups creating things such as the People's Budget. We see monuments coming down across the state. We have folks making sure that we honor folks like yourself and the congressman, honoring them by helping folks get out the vote. We are helping folks because of COVID. Folks have lost their jobs. And so another way of protesting is saying, hey, our elected officials won't step in and help. So activists and faith leaders are helping to pay folks' power bills and doing things of that nature. Across the state, we're providing free food boxes and making sure our folks are fed. So there are so many ways that folks can help in so many lanes and so many gifts and talents right now and the reason I bring that up because I know so many people are watching who are wondering what can they do, how can they get involved, and I just want to make sure I let them know that yeah, there are folks on protesting, but there is a place for you as well.
One thing I would suggest too that I should have mentioned earlier is that in each community you need to do what we call a power analysis, and you need to know who's in charge. A lot of times you go and you protest in front of the water department and they can't know anything about what you're talking about. You need to go, you need to protest the people who can make decisions. So you need to know whether it's a political decision, an economic decision, regardless of what kind of decision, but you need to target your protests at those people who can make changes. It makes, why would you go down to the fire department protesting when, they can't do anything about what we're dealing with? So, you need to look at who to make the decisions in your community, local and statewide, and let people know the hierarchy of these folks who we're going to target. And I mean, if it means sitting in the mayor's office, or, or whatever, or lie-in, whatever it takes. I mean, or you can have a tremendous letter writing campaign. You can collect signatures on a petition. There's all sorts of things you can do to irritate them, let them know that you're going to be in their face until they make a decision.
So you're moving to Birmingham when? Because we need your help.
Wait till we get out of this quarantine. We give them hell then. Really, we'll give them hell.
Love it.
So Caleb, as you hear about power mapping, power analysis, who does what, how do you see with all the organizations that are doing the work, we have so many different organizations doing the work, but do you have any thoughts on how can we get these organizations right? People right now are saying Cara, Caleb, and Eva. Naturally, if they're saying they're trying to find their space, hey, they're going to be contacting us after we go off live. But how do we get these organizations somehow together to get all of their information out so that they can say what skill sets they need? Because you may have one organization that may not need the artist or may not need the protester, but we need people who can write letters. What do you see being the best way for us to pull the organizations together, not say that any is better than the other, and say, these are the people we need for this organization, and this is when this organization really is the strength of the movement?
That is a very, very good question. One of the things I would say is to form partnerships. Partnerships is very, very important. I believe it's important that different organizations partner with other organizations to collaborate on specific projects. Not only if they're in need of a certain service, but just to have that connection and be able to show people that two organizations can come together for a common purpose. One of the things I always like to say is, referring back to the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice. It's important that we lift all of our voices for a common good, whether it's an organization, whether it's us as individuals, whether it's young people. It's important that we lift our voice for things that are silent. It's important that we lift our voice even on minor issues on a local level, for getting houses demolished, for getting streets paved, and for many other things. Even on a federal level, restoring the Voting Rights Act. It's important that we lift our voices in whatever capacity that we can.
Eva, Caleb came through that time.
There's one other thing that we have to remember, and Caleb, you brought it into your head, is that leave your egos at the door. This movement is bigger than any of us.
Yes.
It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about us. So leave those egos at the door. And you're going to get your feelings hurt, your toes stepped on, but it's not about you. You got to realize that this is something that's beyond us. And that's why we have to minimize our own personal feelings, and things like that. Leave the egos at the door.
How did y'all keep that in check, Mr. Person? And how did y'all handle conflict during this time?
Well, like I said, we did a lot of things, but the thing is that we knew who our leaders were, and we respected them, and we had a code. If we are in a demonstration, there was only one spokesman for the group, and anyone who media or otherwise approached you, you would refer them to the person that was in charge that day. It may not be the same person every day. We had monitors throughout the group to assist in providing stuff. We had communication. We had megaphones, and we didn't have cell phones in those days, but we had, walkie-talkies and things like that. You have to keep communication with the group. But the main thing is that we talked enough that we knew where each other was. In other words, we knew that when you mentioned something, you weren't trying to hurt anybody's feeling. It's that this is a fact. This is what we need to do. And like I say, the thing is, once you get past that, he hurt my feelings, or he doesn't like me, or she doesn't like me. When you get past that, then you can get down to brass tacks, because this is serious business. This is not something you're playing around with, because people's lives are involved. And you know as well as I do that I have had those conversations with my son and my daughters about when they go out at night, because and I don't go to bed until they get home. I don't care what time it is. I'm going to be up until they get home, because I want them to come home safely. And I know that most Black families go through this scenario of talking with our kids, the little thing cautious we want when they go into a store, how to conduct themselves. We shouldn't have to do that, but it's a necessary evil right now. And we will continue to do those things because we want our kids to come home safely.
Yeah, you may have to tell Eva and Caleb what a walkie-talkie is.
Oh, man.
You can do that later.
It was an earlier form of communication. Much like smoke signals.
I have a question for Eva. You know, we're having this really great conversation, Eva, and Mr. Charles Persons talked to us about how everyone came together, and he talked about, you know, the church and faith leaders and the music. What do you think? What role do you think the churches are playing, and then the faith leaders will play in all of this in order for us to make progress?
Yeah, and I think that's a very important question, Cara, and I appreciate you for it. And when we look at today versus back during the times of the Freedom Riders, you know, the Black church was really all we had as a community. You know, that's where we had our roles, where we could go get all the information that we needed. We knew who the pastor was, and many times our pastors were in the discussions that were happening that everybody else may not have been in. But now, today, that power has been equally distributed across the community, right? So we don't necessarily have to look for an MLK or a pastor to lead the movement, right? But pastors, I still feel, should be very involved in understanding that they can come into a room with activists and with organizers and not be the point person. And a lot of times we end up being the point person because people naturally gravitate towards ministers and pastors. But when you're in an organizing space, that's not necessarily the case. And so I believe that churches, pastors, and ministers have to learn how to come into spaces and not necessarily think that their set of morals are going to always play out in those spaces in order to get the job done. Like, it may not be nice, you know, we may take it up a notch, but I do still feel that pastors and leaders must be willing to come to a table where everybody is on the same level, and that degree or that title does not put you in a place to kind of lead the show. And I think that we, as those of us who are organizers, and it works out for me because I'm on both sides, right?
Yeah.
And I know what hat to put on, and I know when to take off a hat depending on what room and space I'm in. But I still believe the Black church can still help amplify the messages of our attorneys, our organizers, and our activists, and that we may have to tailor that message when we're talking to our congregations, but I still feel like we have a big and major role to play. And I think there just has to be more discussions one-on-one with present day organizations and pastors.
Yeah.
Good.
Mr. Person, how they were critical during that time. And I don't think they understand how important it is to us to have their presence.
I just think that then again it goes to conversation and articulating the situation as it exists. You know, we have so many more means of communication now. We have social media. We have all those kinds of things at our disposal, and that's you got to elevate your game as well. So the thing is that if you can't reach someone through the normal means, then you have to go to Facebook and you have to go to Snapchat and all the others, because you got a different audience out there, and you can only use all the talents that exist in the community. But I think it's so essential, not that when you say pastor, but I think rabbis and Sikh and anyone other religion, if they are part of this community, invite them in, because you don't know who might have that magic answer, the one that gets you over. They might have someone in the group that can smooth the transition from getting you from the streets into the boardrooms. You know, I've been encouraging politicians, but I think right now they're so timid that they're afraid to get out there because they don't want to seem to be partisan. But I just think that what has to happen, you got to have someone who has the guts, more or less, to speak up, because these things are critical. Because these things are happening over and over. Maybe not in your community or our community where it's on the skyline, but things are happening to people that we don't know about. 2 or 3 months from now, we say, "Well, I didn't know that happened." And that's why it's so important that you put light on these instances, no matter whether it's a small town or a large city, because it's continuing. And that's why we have to look not only for local solutions, but also a national solution. And right now, it's not the right time to go nationally, because we have a person that has a bad connotation of Black Lives Matter. And then as long as he's there, we can't take it to a national level. So we got to work more at the local level and other small communities. And we're going to take this movement to a higher level when the time arrives. We'll be ready for it. And we got to get the vote out. And this way we can make sure that our voices will be heard not only in City Hall, but in the White House as well.
Excellent.
I have a question. Relating it back to the young people of this generation, I know that there are a lot of young people who would love to get active in the movement. However, they're afraid of the opposition that they might face. They're afraid of being criticized for their beliefs. They might be afraid of just getting active and letting their voice be heard. What advice would you give to a young person who is battling between getting active and staying neutral?
I'll tell you, like I tell groups, I used to tell them, and this, if you go back to any of my speeches I've given over the last 15 years, you'll see this is a recurring theme. I would always start my conversation off with, before you left home today, you had no idea that by the time the day is over, that you, yeah, little old you, could change the world.
Mm.
So what I would pose to you today is this. If you could change the world, would you? Would you?
Mm.
That's how you get them on board. Let them know there's a niche for you somewhere. There is something for you to do to make life better, not only for this community, but for the world.
Well, I think, and guys, I hope you can hear me. I think that is such a powerful moment to um, begin to wrap up on. As you can tell, I'm not an activist, so I stay out of the way and let you all have a completely engaging, phenomenal conversation. And I thought that was certainly the best part of today, um, that engagement between the intersection of young activists today and those legends of the past. So I certainly want to thank our panelists, Eva, Caleb, you all were phenomenal. I mean, just phenomenal, phenomenal. So we appreciate you all, and we pray safety over you all as you all continue doing the things that you do. As we begin to wrap up, Mr. Person, I wanted to give you a quick opportunity to, if you would, just discuss the Freedom Rider Training Institute that we've been working on and your thoughts about that, and maybe just let the panelists know and the people watching a little bit about the Freedom Rider Training Institute.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Um, hopefully, well, not more than hopefully, we will be a repository for information, but not only to you as activists, but also to teachers, educators, to first responders, and police, and how we can all work together in our communities to make life better. In other words, the police should not fear you, and you should not fear them. You have to realize that there are things that capabilities that they have that can assist you in conducting a march. We normally went march 2 by 2, and we were orderly on the sidewalk. But also, you need to know what the city requires. Does it require a permit? What hours can you march? One thing we never did anything at night, because we know that bad things can happen to good people at night. So, and you also, your ability to see who's doing what is diminished at night. So, I would just say that the Freedom Rider Institute will be that source of information to allow you to understand one another. You know, when you have questions, well, why are they doing this? And they can understand why you are doing what you're doing, you know. So this is our idea, is to have within our communities the mechanism to exercise your First Amendment rights without you being harassed, and also without you being unduly bothering people who are not your targets. And that's why the power analysis here. You should have been on this side of town protesting, and now you're over there. You know, so you're not getting the results that you want because you're in the wrong place. So this is what also the Freedom Rider Foundation will assist you in dialogue and in conversation And hopefully we will be able to be that buffer to assist communities in working out all sorts of problems when it comes to you and as citizens celebrating your First Amendment rights.
Yes, sir. So, with the Freedom Rider Training Institute, as I mentioned earlier, we have a great team led by Mr. Person putting together the Training Institute. We hope, and we certainly will have more information to come as we prepare to launch. So please be on the lookout for that. And Mr. Person, I would be remiss. I know you have a book coming out in April of next year, and would love for you to tell us a little bit about. I know I can't wait to read the book, and hopefully I'm gonna do all I can to get a signed copy, Mr. Person. That's no pressure or anything, but if you could just talk to us about the book that's coming out in April.
Well, I think the book is unique because it shows a lot of similarities to people who protest and about the wonderful people I met as freedom riders and also freedom fighters throughout the country, because there's a unique brand of people. And I think that once you get to know them, that you'll love them like I did. But my book tells about, I lived only 3 blocks from Dr. King's birth home. Believe it or not, we're in the same community. And we used to, well, it was called Buttermilk Bottom. And those of you know what buttermilk is, and you know, might also know what the bottom is. But it just shows that how in those days, even though it was segregation, the Black community was well worked together. It was a good community because we had our churches, we had our schools, we had everything that you had in the larger community. And it just shows that how we all work together towards a common cause, which is we wanted to defeat segregation. And it was a lot of, you know, there was a lot of give and take, and a lot of people that you know about and a lot you don't know. And that was my idea, is that there are a lot of people who will never appear in history books that I want you to know about, who contributed to making our life better. And I think that, you know, I lost my notebook in Birmingham. You know, I don't know if you noticed I was without a jacket in that picture. But then, and a lot of people I wanted to thank who had helped us. We didn't have the green book back there, so we stayed in people's homes after each night. And here you are, 18 years of age, staying with strangers. I mean, I don't know if you would even do that today. You know, you ride off somewhere and hopefully get you back together the next day. So there was a lot of trust involved in those days. And the book goes into a lot of those things, but I think it deals with relationships of people many of you have heard of and many of you have never heard of before, but you'll understand the role, that small part they played in making life better for Black Americans throughout the country, if not the world.
Oh, wow. And I certainly can't wait to read that book. And as you were mentioning, as you were talking, Mr. Person, I had jotted down a few more names that I would like to share. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but C.T. Vivian, Catherine Brooks, Pauline
Right, in
Opuso,
Birmingham.
Diane Nash, Rip Patton, Bill Harbor, all of these names of people that were engaged and a part of the Freedom Ride. You know, another reason why I can't wait to read your book is because I am interested in those stories of not the big names, but those people. And I think we have activists from Birmingham and um, the African American people in Alabama played a huge role in changing America. I don't know if we really grasp the importance of the Black population in this state in the 60s and their contributions. And not, you know, of course, we support and really look up to men like Dr. King and John Lewis, but Fred Shuttlesworth, oh my God, this
Yeah.
man was just a giant, a legend, and contributed so much to um, the movement and the fight at a local level. Um, and Caleb mentioned his grandmother, just people that, you know, everyday people who stepped up and who believed in something more than themselves. And we're certainly grateful to them. And we hope to continue conversations like this moving forward, where we can engage with more people like yourself, Mr. Person. And I would like to add that
Mhm.
the link for today's event. We're recording this and we're going to share this on various media platforms. Certainly the Penny Foundation will have it, and others, but you will certainly be able to find it there. And so as we close and wrap up, Mr. Person, I would, just turn it over to you and, let you, um, take us home. And before we go there, I would like to say that you have generations represented here. You have 4 organizations represented here. Um, and this conversation is not about, do you agree with me? Do you support me? This conversation just is about what's important, the history
Mm,
that unites us all, the the admiration, the progress that was made. We didn't wake up in America and were able to go get on a bus and sit where we wanted to sit. We didn't wake up one day and all of a sudden we could go in stores and go in dressing rooms. That was fought for. That people died for that. People fought sweat, blood, and tears for that. And so the only way I believe we can move forward in a prosperous and enlightened future is by looking back at the past and understanding what happened before to get us where we are. And we would be remiss if we didn't highlight the progress that has been made in this nation. It didn't happen by chance. It didn't happen by luck. It was not a political move. It was people in the street holding up a mirror to America and saying, look at how you are treating
mm,
us. And I think that is one of the things that I take from every conversation I have with Mr. Person. And I have to admit, I'm in awe that I get to talk to Mr. Person, that I can call his phone and say, hey, Mr. Person, how are you today? I've even offered to go in and move Mr. Person furniture if he asks me to. That's how indebted I am to him, and the things that he has done to make this nation um, as great as it is. And so, Mr. Person, I would turn it over to you as we wrap up.
Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure. And what I like to leave with you more than anything is that America needs you. We need you. And no matter how difficult the tasks ahead, don't ever, ever, ever give up.
Wow. Well, we certainly thank you, Mr. Person, again. Eva, Caleb, Cara, we thank you. We thank our sponsors, Penny Foundation, um, Jacksonville State University, Freedom Rider Training Institute, Freedom Rider Park Committee, everyone that helped put this event on today. We certainly thank you. We thank you all for watching and for joining us. Please be on the lookout for more information to come about the Freedom Rider Training Institute. And once again, thank you all for joining us, and please have a good rest of the day. Stay safe, and God bless.